back there in 2 years whether the stock market will be higher and lower. I do know there will be intelligent things to do between now and then, and that if you see one, the thing to do is to do it. Yep.
From your point of view, what's the difference in investing in the entire company like See's versus just a piece of the company like Coca-Cola?
Well, there's way less difference than most people think, in my view. If I own all of See's at Berkshire and we want to change the management, we can change the management. But I don't want to get in with management, so we need to change in the first place. I mean, I'm not. If I got into See's and I thought if I were going to buy See's and I thought I needed to change the management, I might not buy it because I wouldn't. What do I know about making chocolate? So I want to find them with good management. But it is true that if you had a managerial problem and you owned it all, you could change it. It is also true that you can take the capital out of the earnings out of a business that you control 100% of. You can decide the distribution policy and put them over someplace else, and that's an advantage to us. If the XYZ company that we own 5% of wants to go out and buy movie studios or whatever they might want to do, they get to allocate the capital. And all things being equal, and even unequal, I would rather allocate the capital, and I can do that if we own 100%. So that's an advantage, owning 100%. But it's so much more important to own a good business and be in with good managers than to have this little extra advantage of being able to change managers. That it's not a big difference. I would rather own the good business than own all of it. I mean, I'd like to own all of the Coca-Cola, but I'm not going to own all of Coca-Cola. So is that a reason not to buy 7%? No. The one advantage we have at Berkshire is that we have this mental flexibility, but all we're doing is trying to figure out how to put capital into good businesses. And we're not in the steel business per se. We're not in the shoe business per se. We're not in any business per se. We're big in insurance, but we're not in insurance. We're not committed to it. We don't have a mindset which says you got to go down this road. So we can take capital and we can move it into businesses that make sense, and that is an advantage. And since I don't come up the route from any one of these businesses, I've got that advantage of being somewhat detached, perhaps, and therefore objective. Then the question is whether it's smart, but at least I should be objective about it. Banking consolidation. Well, it's going to continue in a big way, and most people like to. Most managers like to grow, and they like to grow intelligently if they can, but if they can't, they're also willing to grow in other ways. And it is, every year the American Banker, which is the daily banking publication, every year they list what used to be 13 or 14,000 banks by size. They don't list them by profitability. In the first 100, they used to show the pictures of the CEOs of the 100 largest banks. And I think that probably has some effect. If you start measuring yourself by size, they measure by assets, but the assets are always balanced off by liabilities in that strange accounting convention. It's the only business in the world where people brag about how much they owe. They say, I got a $100 billion bank, which means they owe $100 billion, or close to it. But I myself do not see, among the banks I look at, economies of scale beyond certain points. There's always an advantage to being dominant in a market, but I'm not sure whether if you've got 200 billion spread across the country and 15% market shares, you're going to have a better business than the guy who's got 30% of the market in Rockford, Illinois, which we used to own a bank in Rockford, Illinois, and which made 2% on assets after tax, and was conservative in every respect. But that bank would earn less money as part of a larger institution. I'm convinced of that. So I don't see great advantages to shareholders in terms of major expansions of banks. I'm not saying it's all a mistake, because I've seen some good acquisitions. Wells Fargo made a terrific acquisition of Crocker, for example, some years back. But I think it will continue, and I think Proverb Bank shareholders are going to be a little luckier than the acquiring bank's shareholders.
I was wondering if you would comment on your perspective of investments outside of the U.S. and in particular address your perspective on how you would hedge currency risk.
Yeah, through Gillette, Gillette makes about 2/3 of its money outside the United States. We own about 11% of Gillette, and Coke makes over 80% of its money outside the United States, and we own 7.7% of Coke. we love the kind of companies that can do well in international markets, obviously, and particularly where they're largely untapped. Would we buy Coca-Cola if instead of being domiciled in Atlanta, it was domiciled in London or Amsterdam or someplace? The answer, of course, is yes. Would I like it quite as well? Probably just a tiny notch less, because there might be nuances of corporate governance factors or tax factors or attitudes toward capitalists or anything else that I might not quite understand quite as well, even in England, as I might in the United States. But so I prefer, by a small margin to many countries and by a large margin to other countries, I prefer a U.S. domicile operation. But I also prefer businesses that earn high returns on capital and control and all of that sort of thing. So we will look any place to find a good business. And I find it easier to find them in the U.S. I understand the accounting a little bit better. I probably have more insight into how they're going to function in the future, a little more here than in some other country. But I don't rule them out. On the other hand, the U.S. equity market is a $5 trillion market, and if I can't make money in a $5 trillion market, it may be a little bit of wishful thinking to think all I have to do is get a few thousand miles away and I'll start showing my stuff. Yeah.
You and Mr. Munger have long talked about franchise value of businesses. And without tipping your hat, I'm just curious as to what areas what you perceive as that it has franchise value right now.
Well, franchise value, I mean, the real test is if they don't have your product, but they have something that somebody else says is similar, does the would-be purchaser walk out of the store, particularly if they can walk across the street and buy it? I mean, so if you go in and you say, I'd like a Hershey bar, and they say, well, we don't have Hershey bars, we've got this unmarked chocolate bar, that the owner of the place recommends. Now, if you'll walk across the street to buy a Hershey bar, or if you pay a nickel more for the bar than the unmarked bar, something like that, that's franchise value. And you have to maintain that in people's minds, but it's very important. That was our consideration. When we bought See's Candy, candy was selling for $1.95 a pound. And the question was, would people pay more for that candy as years went along and inflation took place? And the truth is that people, if they perceive that it's the best candy, or a significant percentage of them do in the area, or the dominant percentage do, you're going to do very well with a business like that. The franchise is in their mind. I mean, it's the experience they had. I mean, it's the first time they handed it to a girl and she kissed him afterwards or whatever, or slapped him. I mean, that's what we like them to do with the competitors' candy. But, and they're not going to go home on Valentine's Day and say, here, honey, here's 2 pounds of chocolates. I took the low bid. I mean, it just doesn't work. So if you've got the right kind of product that way, if you're Wrigley's chewing gum or whatever it may be, you're paying. You may be paying for taste in this case. You may be paying for a mental association that you have. You may be paying for service availability or a lot of things. But that's franchise value. And then the question is how durable is it? How big is it and how durable is it? And I say that franchise is basically like a moat around your economic castle. Now, there's two things that are important. How big is the castle? Coca-Cola is a big castle. See's Candy is not a very big castle, but it's a castle. And around both of those, there's a moat. And that moat is either slightly eroded